Today, we live in a world where our data, conversations, and transactions are secured with algorithms beyond the comprehension of most. Certificates and protocols like RSA encryption safeguard our digital lives, ensuring the messages we send, the accounts we access, and the secrets we keep are protected. But what's interesting is, less than a century ago, specifically during World War II, this level of security would have been unimaginable. It was even worse because it was at a time when secrecy meant the difference between life and death. And at the heart of this very war of code and cryptography was a very specific machine, the German Enigma. The German Enigma, or really the Enigma machine, was a cipher machine that the Germans utilized in their war efforts during World War II. What's actually quite funny is that it was developed in the early/mid 20th century, and it was very much commercially available. Like, people could buy this machine. Financial institutions would, from time to time, use it to encrypt financial documents and make them safer, etc. But that's beyond the point. The point here is that the German actually utilized it for their war efforts, and it was quite pivotal. They would use it from their day-to-day communications, going from strategic decisions to actual battlefield commands. And how it would work is that an operator would receive a plaintext, whatever that plaintext was, and they would utilize the machine to convert it into ciphertext and then send the ciphertext through radio frequencies utilizing Morse code. So they would encode the ciphertext prior to sending it through radio frequencies. Radio frequencies are quite interceptable very easily, especially nowadays. So the Allied forces could intercept those radio frequencies, know that it's Morse code, so transfer the Morse code or decode really the Morse code into ciphertext, but then they would be stuck with the ciphertext. It was extremely difficult to go from the ciphertext back to the plaintext simply because of the numerous combinations that the Enigma machine actually allowed the operators to make. And by numerous, I mean this.
To crack the code before it changes and you start again.
5 rotors, 10 plug board cables. That's
1 million.
1,000 million.
No, I've got it. It's million. Oh, it's in the millions, obviously.
it's over 150 million possible settings.
Very good.
159, if you want to be exact about it. 159 with 18 zeros behind it. Possibilities. Every single day.
Yes. More than 159 million, whatever you want to call it, combinations were available. So how did this work? That's the interesting part. So here we are actually looking at a virtual version of an Enigma machine. The link is right there. I'm circling it. If you're interested in going there and doing it yourself, please feel free to. But let's dive into how this complex device actually worked. At first glance, the Enigma machine resembles a typewriter enclosed in a metal or wooden box. Here we have a metal Enigma machine in a wooden box, but that doesn't matter. And it has a keyboard for input and a series of lamp or bulbs that light up to display the encrypted output. But what makes the Enigma machine special lies in its internal components, most notably 3 of them: the rotors, plug board, and reflector. So the rotors, or wheels, each Enigma machine would have 3 to 5 of them. Here we have 3, and each would have 26 contact points, 1 for each letter of the alphabet. These rotors can rotate independently of each other, and each rotor represents a scrambled alphabet mapping. When a letter is pressed on the keyboard, the current flows through these rotors and scrambles the input letter into a different letter. What makes this process even more complex is that after each keystroke, at least one rotor rotates or steps forward by 1 position. This movement actually alters the electrical pathway of the machine, and it ensures that identical letters pressed at different times yield different outputs. For example, if I press the letter A, it might result in a letter, but pressing A again later might yield an entirely different letter, as you just saw here. And we can do this over and over again. So before using the Enigma machine, operators had to configure the rotors according to a predetermined key sheet that specified which rotors to use, their order, and their initial starting positions. Here's an example of an actual key sheet. I'm not sure, I don't speak German. I'm not sure how accurate this is, but it would be very similar to this. And these key sheets would be changed every month. So as you can see, they go from 1 to 31, which is really the days of the month, and each day would have a different starting position. So this, further gave an enormous number of possible starting configurations for the German forces. Next, we have the plug board, and the Enigma machine pretty much had one specific for the Nazi forces. As I mentioned earlier, there was a commercially available one that those ones did not have a plug board, but this one does. It was specially made for the Nazi armed forces. This plug board further scrambled the letters by swapping pairs of letters before and after the signal passed through the rotors. So operators could connect up to 10 pairs of letters using cables, adding another layer of encryption. And as an example, if the letter A was connected to Q on the plug board, pressing A would first be swapped to Q before the signal even reached the rotors. And this simple-looking component vastly increased the number of possible settings and made encryption even more challenging. Finally, it's hard to see it here. It's not quite on the map, but there was a reflector that allowed each signal to pass through the rotors and reach it. The reflector's purpose was to pretty much send the electrical signal back through the rotors, but in reverse. So it made sure that the encryption process was symmetric, meaning that the machine could actually both encode and decode messages. Because what's the point of encoding if I cannot decode? But the reflector had a critical design choice, and this was the major flaw of the Enigma machine. Also made sure that a letter could never be encoded as itself. Keep that in mind. So let's actually see this in action with a very quick example. Here I have my own Enigma machine where I have my rotors located right here. My ciphertext field is printed here. I have my reflector here. My plain text field is here so the operator can type letters here. And finally, I have my plug board here. Let's say I want to encrypt the letter A. So I will go ahead and I press A on the keyboard. First, what will happen is that the plug board might actually swap A with Q. Next, the signal passes through the first rotor, scrambling it to further say L. So it goes from the plug board to the rotor, and it says L. And then, this subsequent series of transformation occurs rotor by rotor. It goes from the first rotor to the second to the third, and then from the third goes to the reflector. The reflector then does the reverse of that, like we talked about before, where it goes back to the third, which may or may not go back to the second, may or may not go back to the first. And then from here, it actually chooses the letter to print. Let's say it chooses the letter F. What occurs is that this letter F actually goes back to the plug board, and F might go to another letter, let's say C. So we actually have F as the output from the rotors plugged into C if the operator chooses to do so, and finally C is the encrypted version of A. And with that in mind, by the way, I'm wearing different clothes because recording this took more than one day, but the staggering complexity of the Enigma machine allowed it to have exactly 158 quintillion, 962 quadrillion, 555 trillion, 217 billion, 826 million, 360,000 different combinations every single day. That is just insane. Well, today we know that the Enigma machine has been broken during World War II, but how did that happen? Well, for one, even before the war, Polish mathematicians Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Różycki, and Henryk Zygalski had reverse-engineered aspects of the Enigma machine by analyzing intercepted messages and deducing its wiring. They had pretty much built early decryption methods which they shared with their allies in 1939, giving them a really crucial head start. As the war intensified and the British were really trying to crack Enigma, they set up Bletchley Park, which was really the hub of all of their coding and decryption efforts. There, a team of mathematicians, engineers, and linguists, led by Alan Turing, took up the challenge Turing is known as one of the pioneers of computer science, and he devised the bomb, a machine that rapidly tested potential Enigma configurations. Before we talk about the bomb, though, I would like to mention that Alan Turing was not alone in this endeavor. Gordon Welchman, another mathematician, enhanced the bomb's efficiency by creating the diagonal board, which streamlined its operations. John Clark, a brilliant cryptanalyst, played a pivotal role alongside Turing and was instrumental in deciphering complex Enigma messages. Overall, women were just indispensable to the efforts of Bletchley Park, with many serving as code breakers, linguists, and machine operators. Other figures like Mavis Beatty, who deciphered critical German messages, and countless others provided the backbone for daily operations at Bletchley. Hugh Alexander, a chess champion and a leading codebreaker, also contributed significantly and guided teams that worked on some of the most challenging description tasks. So, let's come back to the bomb. So earlier, I mentioned that the Enigma had a critical flaw. It was the simple fact that, let's say for example, I pressed A on the Enigma machine, I would never ever get A back. I would always get a different letter. Let it be random, it can be K, G, Z, but it would never be A. And that's what the bomb really took advantage of. So let's walk through a practical example. Suppose it's 1943, and the code breakers at Bletchley Park intercept an encrypted German message. Their first challenge is to make an educated guess about the plain text content of the message. This is called a crib. Cribs were often based on routine phrases or predictable content. For example, German daily weather reports, which were transmitted at the same time each day, often contained standard wording. In this case, the code breakers suspect that their intercepted message contains the word Wetterbericht. Excuse my German, but it means weather report in German. Sometimes they would end their phrases with Heil Hitler. Anyways, by guessing this phrase, they gain a starting point for aligning the crib with the intercepted ciphertext. Then, the code breakers must choose a potential starting point in the ciphertext for their crib alignment. However, there is again this critical rule that must be followed. According to the design of the Enigma machine, no letter can ever encrypt to itself. This means that when aligning Wetterbericht with the ciphertext, they must first ensure that no letter in the crib aligns with itself in the ciphertext. As you can see in this example, in my first try, T was aligned with T, and my second try was again aligned with T, and now, during my third try, we see that there is no contradiction with that. Once the crib is aligned without violating the Enigma's rule, the code breakers make an initial guess about the plugboard settings. Let's assume they guess that W is connected to A on the plugboard. This means that when the letter W is pressed, it transforms to A before passing through the rotors. The bomb machine pretty much stimulated how the Enigma would encrypt this letter. A travels through the stimulated rotors, is reflected, and then returns through the rotors, eventually producing a transformed output. Suppose it transforms to P, which matches the first letter of the ciphertext. So far, everything checks out, and there's no contradiction. The bomb moves on to the next letter. If the next letter in the crib is E and aligns with the ciphertext K, the bomb tests this transformation based on the current plugboard guess and rotor settings. If the transformation results in an impossible scenario, such as E becoming E, a contradiction is detected, meaning the initial plugboard guess and all assumptions tied to it are incorrect. When a contradiction occurs, the entire chain of settings and guesses is discarded. The bomb moves on to test a new plugboard guess, such as connecting W to B, and the process repeats. So instead of testing out all the possible configurations one by one, which would have been pretty slow and almost impossible, the bomb actually filtered out the impossible configurations, leaving the possible ones, and it did that almost instantaneously per configuration through logical deduction. Overall, running the bomb took less than 30 minutes, for the most part a little over 20 minutes, which was amazing, since the German would actually change their configurations every single day. Intercepting a message in the morning, running it through the bomb for 30 minutes and having it give out the rest of the possible configurations was great, because then all you had to do was bring in human verifiers who would try out every single one of those leftover possible configurations by taking a ciphertext that was intercepted through radio frequencies and simply trying it out on a real Enigma machine and finding out which one actually gave a plain text. All of this intelligence collected was named Ultra by the Allies, and it was pivotal in the war efforts. It allowed commanders of the Allies to have foreshadows of strategic decisions that the Germans would make. It was very pivotal during the Battle of the Atlantic when U-boats were trying to target vital supplies, and it was even utilized during D-Day to know exactly where certain components were located. Overall, the work done at Bletchley Park, Enigma, Ultra, Alan Turing, and all of his collaborators really cemented themselves in history and in the course of the war.